Hey and welcome back, lovely people. Continuing my series on secret Air Force bases, this is a base with a difference. Sure, it was top secret, and in World War II it was extremely secret, but it's not about UFOs, it's not about weird things, it's about when secrecy was vital. A few miles outside of Kettering in Northamptonshire is an air base with a secret history. Based here in World War II were the 801 Bombardier Group of the US Air Force, and their mission was very secret. They went by the code name Carpetbaggers, and their job was to drop agents and supplies into occupied Europe behind Nazi lines. So I made this film about the French resistance, and the interesting thing about that French resistance is how did they get their weapons, their training, their explosives? And they all came from here. RAF Harrington, or US Air Force Base 179. Here in France, teams from the Special Operation Executive, a liaison officer, a training officer, and a radio officer were dropped all over occupied France to liaise with local resistance, or the maquisards, the kids hiding in the woods who had resisted going to Germany. And what these resistance fighters needed was weapons and training. And that's what the SOE supplied using Harrington. Here's a short film about Operation Carpetbagger and its mission to drop thousands of tons of supplies into occupied Europe.
During World War II, the 492nd Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force and the OSS Packing Station under the direction of SHAPE worked in close cooperation with similar British services to deliver thousands of tons of vital supplies to enemy-occupied countries, successfully arming, controlling, and coordinating the activities of 350,000 resistance members. The 492nd Bomb Group alone flew over 3,000 sorties, carrying more than 7,000 tons of operational supplies, which were used by guerrilla forces to blow up German supply trains, depots, and other military strongpoints.
Interestingly, the 801 group used Liberator's B-24 bombers. These were often high-time bombers, retired from bombing operations and transferred to Operation Carpetbagger, where they were painted matte black. Most of the armaments were taken out, only the tail and the top turret was left. The base was black, and most interestingly, the circular gun turret underneath the plane was removed, leaving a hole, which was euphemistically known as a Joe hole. This was J for Jedburgh. The Americans had a secret spy network called the OSS, and teams of American spies also were in occupied Europe, liaising with the Brits with the SOE. This was vital to win World War II.
It was usually around 2200 hours when ships and crews were getting ready for the takeoff. In France, the men of the resistance were already starting on their way to the clandestine reception fields, eagerly waiting for the supplies that would come that night. Once more, the position of containers and panniers were checked to make sure they would arrive in good order. The Jeds, who were going to be dropped along with the cargo that night, arrived on the field, slipping aboard through the Joe hole. Then the operations officer gave orders to flight control to signal the planes for the takeoff. The darkness at Harrington, blinking on and off, the light signals conveyed the orders to the pilots in silence. The first plane roared defiantly toward occupied Europe. The second. The third, until all planes were in the air.
After D-Day, the resistance fighters of Europe were instructed to slow down the movement of German troops who were going up to Normandy to fight the invasion of the Allies. It was a very successful campaign by the resistance fighters in all the countries. Eisenhower said World War II was shortened by a number of days because the Germans were slowed down by the brave resistance. Nearer the end of World War II, Harrington was used for another mission. It was a fuel supply base. The planes were then taking thousands of gallons of fuel over to Europe to supply the Allies' fight against Germany. And then eventually RAF Harrington, or US Air Force 179 base, was no longer needed, and it reverted to farmland, but it was always kept on standby. And then this happened. The Cuban Missile Crisis, and suddenly we needed to have ballistic missiles based in Britain.
The horizontal shelter slides back to reveal Thor, an intermediate-range missile.
In the 1950s and 60s, the atomic age had arrived in the British landscape. American nuclear missiles based here, pointing towards the Soviet Union, ready to fire, ready to inflict unimaginable carnage.
We are standing now where the missile head would have lain on its transporter erector.
Hard to imagine that exactly 50 years ago, the Cuban Missile Crisis had this place on the highest state of alert. An historic moment, an historic place.
And where better to fit these new Thor intermediate ballistic range missiles than in a field in Northamptonshire. RAF Harrington once again became a top secret base. Today, the Thor Missile launch platforms are Grade 2 listed buildings, and there is a fascinating museum, the Carpetbagger Museum of Harrington. Go and visit it when it reopens after this zombie apocalypse and learn from the wonderful people who work there the history of one of Britain's most secret bases. The truth is out there. What a fascinating story. If you enjoyed the film, please give it a thumbs up. And remember, there's more secret history on the Professor Simon channel.